Hello and welcome to Strategy to Action, a new series focusing on changing a conversation about business strategy in Trinidad, Tobago, the Caribbean, and in fact around the world. Our main facilitator is Dr. Keita Demming, and Dr. Keita Demming is an award-winning educator and coach with a PhD in adult education and workplace learning, who wants to transform companies into places that are idea-driven and people-centered. Dr. Demming is passionate about fostering community, and one of his proudest personal achievements is the growing of TEDxPortofSpain to one of the most successful TEDx events around the world. Keita was born in Trinidad and Tobago, but now resides in Canada. Dr. Demming, thank you for joining us. Happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, let's, I know I gave a bit of your bio in that introduction, but let's start from your perspective. Who is Keita Demming?
Keita Demming is somebody who's very passionate about performance within the business world, and I'm very interested in two questions: how to become better people in business, and how to become better business people. Part of that is because I believe we transform organizations one conversation at a time, and if we change the conversations in organizations, we transform organizations. One of the big myths that I'm challenging in my most recent book is that this is a very academic term, but the dominant narrative of organizations is organizations as machines and not organizations as conversations. And once you change the metaphor in which we are using to talk about organizations, we change the entire approach. So specifically in the Caribbean, we tend to take a very top-down, heavy-handed approach. In other parts of the world, we use conversations. We start with why it matters to the individual for them to be here and how they're contributing to the larger goal. And I think with a few mindset shifts, we could really make a transformative difference and a material difference in the experience of the everyday person, whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in Trinidad, whether it's in Canada where I reside. So that's a little bit about myself.
It's interesting to hear you delineate organizations as a machine, which seems to indicate or imply input, output, efficiency, productivity, as opposed to organizations as a conversation. Mm-hmm. Does that have a cultural underpinning, or is that transferable between different cultures? And what do you mean by an organization is a conversation? Because most of us understand, because we've been socialized in many different jurisdictions, as the organization as a machine-based model, because it's about productivity, it's about output, it's about profit, as opposed to conversation, as you're suggesting.
So let me just be clear about something. Because I'm saying it's organizations are conversations, I'm not saying it's not about profit. I'm not saying it's not about the output. At the end of the day, we have to create value as an organization. Otherwise, there is no demand for whatever service or product that we're offering. So me saying organizations as conversations isn't then saying profit is not important. What I'm saying is that the way we motivate people to do things that are greater than we can dream or imagine is not through a machine approach, but it's through a human approach, which is conversation. So I don't know a country in the world where we don't have conversations to get things done. So the question of whether it's a cultural thing, to me, doesn't make sense, because we get things done through conversation. So the narrative I often say is, what people don't realize is conversation is the action. So for example, for you and I to have this meeting today, we had to have a conversation to make this happen, or several to make this happen. That conversation happened to be over email, and we had a previous conversation to get us to this point and refine what was this series going to be about. That is the action. It is in that moment that we decide which door to open next, which future we're going to build next. So that's only one side of whether it's culture, and why I'm talking about this conversation piece. The second part about it is that I did some work in Trinidad a number of years ago, and the owner, or the person who brought me in, quite proudly said, I tell my people, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. And I said to him, so let me ask you a question. If I have a problem that I can't solve, and I'm obedient to what you're saying, what happens in that instant? Because you've just instructed me not to come to you unless I have a solution. What that means is you've just given your audience permission to not come to you with problems until they have a solution. So it is very possible that in your organization there are a ton of problems right now that you have no idea about, and they're following your instructions. So we have to be very careful about the kind of language we use in general, the instructions we give to people, because it has real world implications in very simple ways. So my friend and co-author, he's written a book called Speak Up. His name is Steve Shadletsky, and he talks about organizations need to do two things. They need to be safe and they need to be worth it. So for you to get the best out of somebody, it needs to be safe for me to challenge whoever it is in the room, whether you're your boss or whatever, around an idea. Not challenge you personally, not challenge you in a disrespectful way, but challenge you about an idea. And that needs to be safe, and it needs to be worth it. It needs to be worth my time for me to tell you, I think if we do this new thing, we will reach customers in a way that nobody else can. But I have that, for me to have that conversation with you, it needs to be safe and worth it. And I don't think, and that all happens within the context of conversation. We build the future through conversations. And until we recognize that, the conversations we don't have more implications than the conversations we actually have.
How do you encourage that environment? And is it that we're talking about a shift in what has been, or has it existed before, but we haven't spoken about it?
It's existed before in the sense that when I'll give you an example. I'm trying to give examples from the Caribbean. So when I did TEDxPortofSpain, there's a somewhere out in the world there's a blog of somebody talking about their volunteer experience with TED. And what that person was saying, they've never had a volunteer experience in Trinidad where people were respectful, their ideas were taken, and they loved what happened out of there. The approach we took in that was, what's your strength? That's your strength. Let's bring it to the team and double down on your strength. So that's a context where I happen to be managing that team, and we built that. So the examples exist. So for example, I think the examples exist in places like Steel Pan, very odd places like that, football teams, those kind of things where people have safety to do things. But because it doesn't always transfer into the formal world, we sometimes struggle to see what's possible. So for me, if you have a group of friends in Trinidad or in the Caribbean or wherever you are, and you have that capacity to both speak up and it is safe, it exists. Now the question is, how do we then transfer that into the formal workplace? And how we do that is one vote at a time. So what is likely to happen is an employee might test if it's safe and if it's worth it with a small action. He or she might do that 3 or 4 times. And if you come down with the hammer the 5th time, that person's not shutting up. He's going to shut up for a while. So it's very easy to stop the culture of speaking up and the culture of saying, hey, this is how, this is what I really think about the direction of the company. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of ongoing work. And one of the things that I get very annoyed about is that people want to do one-time workshops to do team building or team effectiveness, forgetting that it's an ongoing conversation where every day you are helping to create and foster that environment where it's safe and worth it. And every day people are deciding is if it's safe or worth it. And it just takes one mistake. And if you make that mistake, you can then go to somebody and say, hey, yesterday I came down on you heavy with this thing. You had a really good idea. It shouldn't have been that hard. We need the best and brightest here, giving us the best and brightest ideas. Otherwise, this company will never be as good as it can be.
What's the evidence? Because behavior change is sometimes difficult depending on the circumstance and the motivation. You mentioned whether it's worth it to the company or worth it to the employees or the individuals in the company. What are examples of companies that use this approach and have been very, very successful?
So the one that has been very successful, I would say, is a company called IDEO. IDEO is one of the premier design companies in the world. They have a very strong culture of critiquing ideas. One of the companies where it has not worked very well is companies like Wells Fargo and companies like Boeing. So both of those are examples where leadership said, implement these things. Frontline people were like, this is neither good nor safe for the end user, but I've been giving these instructions, these metrics. And if I speak up, I'm going to be fired. So people shut down. And in both those cases, it resulted in disastrous things for both the company and people. Boeing, it meant safety of planes. Wells Fargo, it meant people going into debt. That was an awful situation. But we know from the research, clear. Google is another example. Google did Project Aristotle, and they looked at what creates high-performing teams. Across the board, they found it was psychological safety, which is, do I feel safe to speak up? It is the same thing as speak up culture, just rebranded a different way. Do I feel like I can challenge and put my ideas forth? And if we make mistakes, those mistakes are seen as learning opportunities and not issues to be punished. So take, for example, I come to you as a boss and you say, hey, we just did this thing. It's going to cost the company $10,000, but this is what we learned from it. If your response is to swear at me and chastise me and etc., that's very different from, you know what, that was a $10,000 cost. What I want you to do is implement a process so that decreases the chances of that happening again. Let's make sure that's a very different response. So now that person, when they come and they made a mistake, they're more likely to come to you. And here's the interesting thing about the research. When you research teams, high-performing teams report more mistakes than low-performing teams. Both teams probably make the same amount of mistakes, but high-performing teams report them because there's that speak-up culture, because they know a mistake is a learning opportunity. And I'm not talking about somebody being careless and negligent. Careless and negligence is not accepted, but genuine mistakes are seen as learning opportunities that we can then go and improve things. Research is clear on that.
What you're speaking to is a change in value systems from what I'm hearing. How do you introduce that into an organization and maintain it? You referenced Boeing a while ago, who were given a particular set of instructions to implement a new system, but they didn't seem to wholeheartedly embrace it at every different level. And in a real sense, it to me speaks to introducing a new value system, the value of a conversation, the value of treating each one's opinions and ideas equally as opposed to top down. How do you introduce that in the context of an organization, small, medium, or large?
Yeah, so let's go back to this idea of conversations as machines, organizations as conversations, or organizations as machines. Let's go back to that idea. So my brother's a mechanic, and he's an amazing mechanic, and he can fix cars. I'll get to your point using this metaphor. If he has to fix your carburetor, he just goes to the shop, buys a carburetor, replaces the part, and you're good to go. Your car works fine until another or different part breaks. That's the organization as a machine metaphor. What we tend to do is say, we have this organization, this person here is not working out. Let's fire that person, get rid of them, and replace them with somebody. Same way like the carburetor. But it doesn't work like that. Because that person, A, doesn't have the background knowledge. They have a different personality. They don't know the other people. They were conversations that were left out of, etc. So because we have that framework of just replace people in the same way we replace parts, that's why you're using language like, let's introduce values. So I can't introduce values because I come with my own values. So we can't say to you, hey, let's introduce values and then expect me to change Paul, there's no way you're going to change my values. My values are me, they're personal, etc. But what we can change is the purpose and what we're going for. Why are we here? Those very soft things like mission and vision stuff that people don't like to talk about. What is the purpose of this organization? So, for example, I'm in an organization right now. The purpose of that organization is to demonstrate that the Caribbean is more than a tourist destination. That is why we're doing things. Anything that doesn't serve that, we're going to choose not to do that. It goes back to aligning people to what the central purpose of whatever we are here. We're not trying to instill values onto people. We're trying to get alignment on the vision that we've set forth and what are the best actions that are going to help us accomplish this vision. That's where people miss. So if I want to convince you of something, I want to change your mind. I can never change your mind. You can only change your mind. But if I want to do that, my best approach is to plant seeds of doubt. My best approach is an indirect approach. And what we don't realize sometimes in organizations is that it goes right back to that indirect approach of remind people of why we're here, why we exist, and what your role is, and why you are so important to this, and why you matter. Make
Does
people
that
feel
does that mean the vision and mission has to be a different kind? Because some companies will tell you flat, our mission here is to make money. Our vision is the best to be at making money, and they're
good
very
luck.
yeah. Well,
I wish you good luck.
a lot, but other companies are like that.
Yeah. And then go hire robots. Go hire robots. And here's what I tell you about those companies. There will be another company that will come and they will have a mission and they will have fully engaged employees. And that company will outperform you every single time because you cannot get people to, you know what, I was thinking about this problem last night and this is how I think we should do it. In company A, where the mission is making money, you don't get people thinking about those kind of things at night. They check out at 5 and they check in at 8 in the morning. That is what happens. To have a fully engaged company where people bring their full selves, they bring their creativity, they bring their intelligence, they bring everything to work. Because I can give you my time, I don't have to give you my creativity and intelligence. When it's about money, you get my time. I'll give you time, no problem. You're paying me. That's great, transactional. But when it's about purpose, when it's about mission, you get time, creativity, and intelligence. And
Now,
that's a distinction.
the book is called Strategy to Action. You mentioned at the start that the strategy shouldn't be long-winded; it should be able to fit on a page. Define strategy first in a real sense. What does strategy mean? Because people have different conceptions and misconceptions about what a strategy entails.
In quite simple terms, strategy is what are we going to do that gives us the best chance of winning in whatever zone we've decided to play in. That's what strategy is. From an academic perspective, strategy is the alignment of outputs, objectives, capabilities, and resources with the opportunities and challenges the environment provides. That is the academic definition of strategy. But what we want to know is what are we going to do? Sorry, how are we going to approach winning this particular game? The how of what we're doing. We've decided this is our vision, this is our mission. In order for us to be best in the world at this, we think the best chance we have of doing this is taking this particular approach. Let's use Starbucks. There are millions of coffee shops in this world, and there's one Starbucks. Starbucks got very good at doing two things really well. If I go to Starbucks in Seattle and I go to Starbucks in Vancouver, the drink that I order in Seattle tastes the same as the drink I order.
Standardization.
Standardization and replication. They got really good at that. The second piece they did really well was experience. When I walk into a Starbucks, it's a certain smell. I can sit down. I can do all these things. So it's experience. I go to Starbucks. I take my coffee and I drop my coffee off at Starbucks. Don't worry about it, sir. Here's a brand new Starbucks. The experience is great. That just cost them $6 or $8 right now with Starbucks, the way that is. But it costs $8 for that one thing. But they know the lifetime value of me. So they'll pay the $8 now, knowing that I will buy an $8 drink for the next 30 years.
Because
Right?
of your experience.
Because of my experience. Because you said, hey, you know what? Forget about that thing that just fell. That's on us. And they do that all the time. If there's a problem at Starbucks, they fix it. It is easy to fix.
And simple things like customer focus, customer centered experiences, and employee centered experiences. They put your name on the cup, so it's about you.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The third piece that they did really well, which is the employee experience, is one of the things I look for if I'm hiring somebody, especially somebody in a customer facing role, is have they been trained at Starbucks? Anybody who's gone through Starbucks training, I know you've had amazing customer service experience training. So they've invested in their people. So one of the things that often happens is and this happens around the world, and I don't want to blame the Caribbean for this. This happens everywhere. I don't want to invest in this person because they're going to go to another company and the other company will benefit from that investment. That is a silly, silly approach. When you invest in people, people know they've invested in you. So they give you more because they now know that you care. In the same way that before my child can learn from a teacher, my child has to know and think and believe that you care about me and you love me. If he doesn't know, think, and believe that you care about him, he's not. You can never teach him. Period. That's just it's not going to happen. And it's the same with people, which is why this whole metaphor of organizations as machines versus organizations as conversations has to change. It is a dominant narrative where we use it is so pervasive in our language. We don't even recognize how we dehumanize people in that experience and how we create underperforming organizations. And it's simple fixes that I think we can do. And I've seen it. I do it every day. Work in organizations where 18 months after, it's a completely different organization because we give people conversational skills. We teach people how to have conversation skills that focus on performance, humanize people. And if you are not part of this and you don't buy into the purpose of this, we redefine our relationship.
What's interesting, thinking about an organization as a conversation automatically implies that there are people involved in that process, as opposed to as a machine model where there are elements of production. So it's very humanistic an approach. How do you think about in the organization? A lot of these insights you're providing here, Keita, seem to be transferable not only to an organization but to people's lives. Would you say that's true? And if so, how?
100%. 100%. Interestingly, I have a client right now who he runs a very significant business. When we started working together, it was a $4 million business. It's now a $16 million US business. And he came to me the other day and said, you know what I realized? I have a hard time having difficult conversations in the office. So he's the boss. He owns a company. So he's avoiding difficult conversation with key people in his company and the people he's working with. My first question to him was, do you avoid difficult conversations with your wife? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay. So this is a skill we're going to work on, not for your business, but for you. Because this is a skill you need to have. Difficult conversation with your kids, difficult conversations with your wife, difficult conversations with your sister, difficult conversation with your key person in the company. Once you hone these skills, it does something that I call bleeds. It bleeds into other parts of your life. And the notion, again, going back to machine versus organization, machine, organization as conversation, this idea that people can leave their personal stuff at home or out of the company, and in appropriate ways. I don't want to hear about like your bad date and your breakup, and like there's certain things I don't need to hear about.
Time and place.
There's a time and place, but there is like, hey, today I'm not feeling great. I got some stuff going on, but if you see that I'm like a little bit down, just know that I got some stuff going on. Cool. Mm-hmm. Like let's humanize in an appropriate way in the business. So my point is that I focus on how to become better people in business so that we can become better business people. And there's no compartmentalizing. It all bleeds. It's all connected. Once you start to work on one area, it improves all kinds of other areas. For example, anybody who's listening to this, if you want to change your life in some way, first thing to do, clean up your sleep. Go to sleep at the same time every day and try and get 8 hours of sleep. If you do that alone, that transforms your life in ways that you wouldn't even believe.
You just made a profound statement that really resonated with me. People try to change their business without trying to change the people in the business. So they focus on the business and not the people. In our last 3 minutes, a lot of what we focused on is profoundly about the conversation and the importance of conversation. Should we presume everyone can have a productive conversation, or is that also something we have to teach people in terms of the type of productive conversations we need to have?
So there are about 4% of the population who are psychopaths or narcissists. We can't teach that percentage of the population. Right. Everybody else, I think, can learn the skills to have good conversations, and conversations that are generative and productive and lead towards bigger insights.
So what are the elements? How would you define a productive conversation?
One that moves. So one of the challenges with conversations is that they linger. So you and I are going to have this conversation right now, and then we're going to have another one, and we're going to have another one, and we're going to have another one. It might be finished for today, but it may not be complete, and it may never be complete. So one of the challenges with conversations is, what is the purpose of that? It all comes down to, unfortunately, our ability to regulate our emotions and focus on what's the goal of that conversation. So if I'm in a sales conversation, every time I enter that conversation, I know what the goal is. In fact, forget that. I was having a very difficult conversation about a topic that's very polarizing in society. What I did, instead of telling the person what I did, I used a technique of asking questions. We had an hour and a half conversation. I never once shared my view. And the person left that conversation, I love how you think. And up to this point, she's never heard what I think.
Because she felt that her opinion and her thoughts were valued.
Now, when I want to have a conversation with her, she's bought into me in a very different way. I'll give you another example. A simple thing you can do in conversations. Somebody says something to you and they say, like, we were really working hard on making sure that things worked well. You repeat something that they said. So you say, things worked well. Tell me more. You use their language. You mirror them, use their language. And what they think that they're having this amazing conversation because you are genuinely listening to them. It's just a small technique you can use. And there are lots of techniques like that you can use that transform conversations in ways that it takes it from a conversation that blows up to a conversation that people feel insightful, and it changes the way they perceive you.
All right, in our final minute, if you could summarize in a few sentences the main points of what you want to leave the audience with, how would you do that in the terms of the changes that are needed, or the insight that is supposed to be resonating about conversations and the importance of those in organizations?
Well, what I was going to say is the importance of strategy to action, which is that ask yourself, is the action I'm about to take in radical service of the future I desire? If the answer there is no, you have to change something. It's a very simple question that you can ask. I'm about to eat this chocolate cake. Is this in service of the future I want? Yes or no? I'm about to take on a client who's going to be a lot of work and not enough pay. Is this in service of the future I want? I'm about to buy this new car that's outside my price range. Is this in the service of the future I want? That simple question transforms the conversation you have with yourself, and the conversation you have with the people in your inner circle, and the conversation you have with whatever sector or system you're trying to provide. So let's focus on that one question.
And the actions you take given the answer that you give yourself.
Exactly.
All right.
And then sometimes you might decide, you know what, today I'm sabotaging. I'm eating the chocolate cake.
Give yourself a blind. Right. Thank you so much. Looking forward to our next topic, when we'll focus on how do you think about problem solving within the context of strategy.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Great conversation here. That's Dr. Keita Demming. The book is called Strategy to Action. We'll see you next time.